Hi everyone, and welcome to the Policy Pub, a series of videos where we will explore some of the capabilities of the Broadcom Layer 7 API Gateway. My name is Jay McDonald, and I am an adoption architect with the Broadcom Layer 7 API management team. Today I am going to discuss Federated Client Certificate Authentication in the API Gateway. This is the second video in our Client Certificate Authentication series. I hope that you've had a chance to watch Policy Pub 1, which discusses explicit client certificate authentication first, because this video builds upon that. This presentation then will cover the second of the two common use cases, which is federated client certificate authentication. So first off, a bit of a flow here. On the left, like we had before, the client, which is represented by three command line utilities, keytool and OpenSSL for manipulating keys, and curl for making requests to the service. On the right, we have the 9.4 gateway represented in red, and note that there's no identity provider mapped to it, nothing to do with the internal identity provider or with an LDAP. Now our first step when dealing with federated identity is that we all have to recognize some certificate authority. Now that certificate authority could be VeriSign, it could be, any number of certificate authorities out there, or it could be your own certificate authority. And in this case, I have a signing certificate and private key in a 9.3 gateway that I'm going to use. And that certificate I refer to as arbitrary-CA. Once we've recognized a client certificate authority, I'm going to go into my gateway, and in the Manage Certificates interface, I'm going to import the arbitrary-CA certificate and set it for signing client certificates. On top of that, I will also declare it as a trust anchor. The next step is to create the federated identity provider, often referred to as a FIP, and I will map that CA certificate to it. What this means is that any certificates that are presented to the gateway can now be validated as being signed by the signing authority. In step 2, we're going to provision a client certificate. We're going to generate a key pair. We're going to then create a certificate signing request, or CSR, and submit that to the CA. In this case, we're going to use the 9.3 gateway to sign that certificate and then return the X509 certificate itself, which will replace in the key pair file, and in this case we're going to replace it in a PEM file so it can be used by curl. Then at runtime we'll send the request along with the certificate, and we'll verify that the certificate that was presented has been signed by the CA that's in the FIP. As usual, there are some caveats. First is that any certificate signed by the CA is considered valid. So if there is a requirement to limit certificates signed by the CA, consider using federated users and/or virtual group filtering. I'll cover those topics in the next episode of the Policy Pub. Second is that by marking the CA certificate for signing client certificates, the gateway will send it in the list of authorities during the handshake, which means that clients won't send certificates signed by other authorities, including self-signed certificates. This may break previous use cases deployed on the gateway. Okay, so let's go to a demonstration. Here I have my policy on my gateway. This is the same policy that we finished with using the explicit client certificate authentication in the internal identity provider. And here I have another script, and I have the command line. Now the first thing that I'm going to do is export that arbitrary CA certificate from SSG93 and import it into SSG94. And I should point out actually that I've already exported it from the 9.3 gateway, so now I can simply import it into SSG94 and set it for signing client certificates. Okay. Next, I will set it for signing client certs, and finally declare it as a trust anchor. Note, if neither of these are set, then this won't work because first off, the gateway won't recognize it as valid for signing client certificates, and because I'm going to set up my federated identity provider to validate to a certificate chain, we have to have a trust anchor. Next, I'm going to create the demo CA FIP and map it to that certificate. I'll go into my identity providers, click on Create Federated Identity Provider, give it a name, Demo CA FIP. And in this case, I'm just going to leave it as X509 certificate credentials. You can also do this sort of thing with SAML tokens. I'm going to search for my arbitrary CA certificate. Click on Next and declare that this federated identity provider must validate a certificate path. We'll click on Finish. Okay, so now I have my demo CA FIP. I'm going to modify my policy so that we'll use that FIP to authenticate the request. Simple enough. Save and activate the policy. Right. So now if I call the gateway using curl with the old self-signed certificate that is still lying around, it should fail. So next we're going to generate the CSR from the jmac.p12 file, and we'll use KeyTool for that. Okay, now I'm going to connect a policy manager to my 9.3 gateway, and it just so happens I have one here. And I'm going to go into my Manage Private Keys, select the arbitrary CA, and sign that CSR with it. So this is the process that would be gone through by the certificate authority. Everything looks good. So I'm going to save this file as jmac.cer.pem. Okay, we'll close that. Now my jmac.cer file is here. We'll confirm the subject and issuer of it. And we can see that the issuer is now the arbitrary signing authority and the subject is as we declared. So I'm going to make a copy of my key pair. And then I'm going to edit this file to remove the old cert and bring in the new one. Okay, so now when I call the gateway using that certificate, everything should work because it has been signed by that arbitrary CA. Note now I can disconnect from my policy manager, just for demonstration here, and I'll use a different certificate that has been signed by the same authority. Now in this case, I've created one for Greg Thompson. It's sitting in my users folder here. And we can see the subject and we can see the issuer. So now let's go ahead and make that call using that certificate. And since it was signed by our authority, we're good to go here. Okay, so in summary, Federated Client Certificate Authentication offloads provisioning to a trusted third party. There's no need to interact with an identity provider at the gateway side, and there's therefore less effort involved. Now, there's issues in that any certificate signed by this certificate authority can now be used, so you may want to consider filtering based on federated users or virtual groups, and we'll cover that with Policy Pub 3 in the next episode. And with that, it concludes this episode of the Policy Pub. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics, please visit the Broadcom Layer7 API management community at the URL shown. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time at the Policy Pub. Cheers.